Hey everyone! Welcome back to my new series I'm starting on the channel called Breaking Down the Soundtrack. The series where I take an in-depth look into the soundtrack of your favorite game, analyze music, and ask the important questions. This series is aimed to help you understand why soundtracks sound the way they do and some core aspects to them. This series is a light understanding of how music for game soundtracks works, so if you ever want to start writing, this may help you. For today's episode, we will be taking a look into the inner workings of the soundtrack of Oxygen Not Included. Now, no more fooling around, let's dig into the soundtrack. Before we talk about the soundtrack itself, we need to know more about the game as a whole and some of its background. Oxygen Not Included is a 2D survival simulation game created by Clay Entertainment. The game starts out simple with you being the all-seeing leader of a colony that you keep expanding, progressing, and maintaining. Released in February 2017, Oxygen Not Included was put on the Steam market as early access, meaning players could play the game as it was being developed and updated. As the overseer of this colony, you start out in an asteroid and figure out how to colonize it, but there's just one major problem. You don't have a stable source of oxygen. Now that we know what the game is about, let's start picking apart the soundtrack. Written by Vera, the soundtrack is mainly sci-fi synth-driven, with very complex percussion in certain tracks. Most of the soundtrack can be classified as ambient, with no beats or percussion, and light melodies to fill the silence. Other tracks are very mechanical sounding, meaning the track has heavy percussion rhythms similar to the precisely timed sounds you'd hear from an industrial machine. To show you what I'm talking about, let's play some tracks in their respective categories. These are the two main categories, but there are just some tracks that fall outside of them. I feel like they were too abstract to deserve their own category. So here are just some for example. The similarities between the tracks are very scarce, but there. To start, the ambient tracks all have a similar sound to them, where they have no sharp sounding synths, but rather synths with slow attacks that fade in. With the complex percussion tracks, there is of course the machine and industrial sounding beats. There's also tracks in particular that sound to be instruments used as sound effects to give off the digital sounds heard in some tracks. The track that I chose to break down today is titled Mounting Efforts to Escape. Probably one of the most complex tracks, but there's a lot to take in from this piece. Starting with a simple intro, it quickly turns into a multi-layered sound-swelling piece of work, with the beginning instrument being turned into a part of the percussion as well. Melodies are very simple in terms of what is being heard, and of course, the heart of the song lies within the amazing underlying beats. But what can be explained about this seemingly hypnotizing percussion? Well, for starters, no sound is the same. Certain instruments are given slight distortion or bit crusher effects. Others are given more of a reverb sound. This can help create a whole atmospheric sound, giving life and depth to the track. This track in particular was really hard to crack, so I may be wrong on some of these, but I based my breakdown off of what I heard and interpreted from my own understanding. Now is the part of the video where we ask the questions. First and major one being, does it help the game and make it better? The short answer would be yes, but for those of you that watched the last episode know that it's more than a short answer, so let me explain. Oxygen Not Included is a game that revolves around you as the player being in charge of these duplicants, who can get stressed out from work, but not as much as you when they start running low on food and no one is making any. I would say the ambient tracks really help ease the mind in moments of pure stress, with the soothing sounds and fade-ins. The other side of the spectrum is about the complex percussion tracks. In-game, you focus on building a lot of machines, buildings, and facilities to help the duplicants in their work. It seems rather fitting that all these tracks have their complex mechanical sounding beats. The next question we can ask is there anything noticeable about the soundtrack? Well, the answer is yes and no. Yes, there is stuff to take away from the soundtrack, but also no, there's not a whole lot. Most of the music was written to fill empty voids in the game, empty sounds, and where nothing could be heard. No track stands out or gives itself a reason to be heard outside of the game, really. Yes, some tracks are really well thought out and crafted well, but in my opinion, they aren't worth listening to. Just to add some final remarks on the soundtrack, it is really good at what it does, but in my mind it just doesn't meet certain points that make game OSTs fun and entertaining to listen to outside of the game itself. That doesn't mean that the soundtrack is not good, because it certainly is, but throughout the whole project, I just found myself listening to one song in particular a lot more over the others, and I couldn't seem to focus on the other tracks because they just felt so disengaging over the course of me just writing the script. And that just about wraps up this episode of Breaking Down the Soundtrack. If you liked it, please do give it that thumbs up rating to show that you guys like the series and want to see more of it. And if you guys liked, feel free to subscribe and click the bell to know when I post another episode. The last video did really well, so I'm happy that you guys are interested in the potential of this series. If there are any more games that you would like me to break down, then leave a comment in the comment section. In the description of the video, there will be a list of soundtracks that I'm currently working on. Anything else important will be linked down below. That's all for today. I'm Time Traveler, signing off.